The Proving Grounds. The Stellar Command Academy floated in the void between star systems, a massive ring of chrome and crystalline viewports that had trained the galaxy's finest officers for 3 centuries. Today, its simulation deck hummed with an energy that made even the most seasoned instructors nervous. Commandant Vexthera stood before the observation window, her 4 eyes tracking the movements of the cadet below. The Krillian officer's chitinous plates shifted in what her species displayed as concern. Behind her, a dozen instructors from across the Galactic Coalition murmured among themselves. "This is excessive," muttered Professor Rindal, his Aquarian gills fluttering with agitation. "The trainee mortality simulation has never exceeded 67% lethality before." "The human requested it," Vexthera replied, her mandibles clicking. "Cadet Kira Valen specifically asked for the worst we could throw at her." On the deck below, Kira stood at the threshold of the simulation chamber. She was unremarkable by human standards: medium height, athletic build, dark hair pulled back in a practical braid. But there was something in her stance, a casual readiness that unsettled the alien observers. The simulation chamber itself was legendary. A pocket dimension generator capable of creating fully realized environments, complete with authentic terrain, weather, flora, and fauna pulled from the database of 10,000 surveyed worlds. It had broken cadets from every species. Some had required psychological rehabilitation. 3 had resigned their commissions entirely. "Cadet Valen," Vexthera's voice echoed through the chamber's speakers. "You have one final opportunity to select a lower difficulty setting. The configuration you've chosen has a 94% failure rate." Kira looked up at the observation deck and smiled. It wasn't a nervous smile or a brave smile. It was the kind of smile someone might wear when opening a gift they'd been waiting months to receive. "Respectfully, Commandant, I didn't come to the Academy to play it safe." Instructor Thalvan, a massive bronther whose species had evolved on a 3G world, let out a rumbling laugh. "I like this one. She has spine." "She won't after the simulation is done," Rindal said quietly. "The Deathworld package she selected. It's based on research data from the Forbidden Rim. Apex predators with pack intelligence, atmospheric toxins, aggressive plant life, and geological instability. We designed it to test emergency survival protocols, not for actual completion." Vexthera activated the simulation. Reality rippled around Kira as the chamber's generators spun up. The sterile metal floor dissolved into dense, tangled vegetation. The air thickened, gaining weight and humidity. Somewhere in the distance something roared. The instructors leaned forward. This was always the critical moment, when cadets realized the simulation wasn't theoretical, when their bodies registered threats that their minds knew were holographic but felt utterly real. Kira took a deep breath and her smile widened. "Oh," she said softly, "this is just like home." In the observation deck, Professor Rindal's specialized teaching appendages froze mid-gesture. "What did she say?" Vexthera pulled up Kira's personnel file with all 4 hands, scrolling frantically. "She's from, oh no." "What?" Thalvan demanded. "Her planet of origin. I thought it was a clerical error. The database listed it as Deathworld, Class 12. The room went silent. The Galactic Coalition's planetary classification system rated worlds on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being planets so hostile they required full environmental suits to visit for even brief periods. Class 11 worlds were considered uninhabitable death traps. Class 12 was theoretical. A worst-case scenario used in textbooks. "What's the planet called?" Rindal whispered. Vexthera's voice was hollow. "Earth." In the simulation, Kira had already begun moving. While most cadets would have frozen, analyzed, and planned, she simply walked into the jungle as if entering a familiar garden. Her hands brushed over plants that other species would have recognized as highly toxic, identifying the safe ones with casual expertise. A creature burst from the undergrowth, a simulated predator designed to trigger panic responses in 90% of known species. It had 6 legs, scissor-like mandibles, and stood as tall as a human torso. Kira sidestepped its lunge with minimal effort, grabbed a fallen branch, and jabbed it precisely into the gap between the creature's armored plates. The predator collapsed, its neural system disrupted. "Lucky strike," Thalvan muttered. But as they watched, Kira continued deeper into the simulation. She navigated a field of motion-sensitive explosive spores by moving with a specific rhythm that prevented triggering them. She crossed a river full of simulated predatory fish by finding exactly the right stones to step on, somehow knowing which currents to avoid. When night fell in the simulation, bringing out the nocturnal hunters that had made other cadets beg for extraction. Kira built a shelter, started a fire using friction, and prepared a meal from plants she'd gathered. She even hummed while she cooked. "This is impossible," Rindal breathed. "The simulation adjusts difficulty dynamically. It should be overwhelming her." Vexthara's plates had gone pale. "I think we've made a terrible mistake." "What mistake?" asked the junior instructor. The commandant gestured at the screen where Kira sat by her fire, looking more relaxed than she had in the academy's own cafeteria. "We thought we were testing her with a Deathworld," Vexthara said quietly. "But we built our Deathworld simulation using the safest planets in our database as reference points. To her, this isn't a test." "Then what is it?" Kira looked directly at the observation camera and winked. "It's a vacation. The nature of humanity." By dawn of the simulation's second day, the observation deck had filled beyond capacity. Word had spread through the academy like a plasma fire. Cadets from every class pressed against the windows, their various forms of visual organs fixated on the human moving through the hostile jungle below. Kira stretched as synthetic sunlight filtered through the canopy. She'd slept well, despite the simulation throwing 3 separate predator encounters at her during the night. Each time, she'd simply shifted positions in her shelter, the creatures apparently deciding the strange bipedal creature wasn't worth the effort. "Threat escalation protocol initiating," announced the simulation's AI in the observation deck. "Introducing volcanic activity and territorial megafauna." Lieutenant Zarkesh, a Valkyrian weapons specialist, shook his crystalline head. "This is beyond standard training parameters. Shouldn't we terminate the exercise?" "She hasn't requested extraction," Vexthara said, though her own concerns were mounting. "And technically she hasn't violated any protocols." On screen the ground began to tremble. Fissures opened in the earth, releasing jets of superheated steam. The simulation had activated a volcanic event designed to force cadets into rapid decision-making under pressure, choosing between multiple bad options while managing panic. Kira assessed the situation in seconds. Instead of fleeing randomly, she moved perpendicular to the fissure pattern, reading the geological stress indicators in the terrain itself. She found high ground, tested the soil composition with her hands and deemed it stable. "How does she know that?" demanded Cadet Plex, a Dorvanian whose species had evolved in underground caverns. "Geological analysis requires equipment." Instructor Thalvan rumbled thoughtfully. "Or experience. My species can sense seismic activity through our feet, but only on our homeworld. She's reading visual cues we didn't even include deliberately in the simulation." As if to prove his point, Kira crouched near a cluster of trees, examining the way they grew. She selected one, climbed it with efficient movements, and retrieved several elongated fruits. She bit into one, made a face, then carefully collected the seeds and sap. "Database," Vexthara commanded. "What is she doing?" The Academy's AI responded immediately. "Analysis suggests the cadet has identified the fruit of a Grenthian spire tree, native to the outer rim. The sap contains compounds that, when processed, create an effective thermal insulator. The seeds can be ground into a protein-rich paste. We included that species for background flora," Rindal said, stunned. "It wasn't meant to be interactable. How would she even know it exists?" One of the human instructors in the back, Professor Marcus Chin, who taught stellar cartography, cleared his throat. "If I may, humans have a rather extensive database of survival knowledge. We've cataloged every edible plant, every predator pattern, every environmental hazard on our homeworld. It's cultural, passed down through millions of years of evolution and thousands of years of recorded history." "Why would you need such extensive knowledge?" asked a Zenthri cadet, her energy form flickering with confusion. Chin smiled sadly. "Because on Earth almost everything can kill you. And I mean everything. The plants, the animals, the weather, the geography, the microorganisms, even the sunlight. Humans who didn't learn survived anyway through sheer stubbornness, and the ones who did learn thrived. In the simulation, the megafauna had arrived. A creature the size of a cargo shuttle emerged from the jungle, a composite design mixing the most intimidating features from a dozen apex predators. It had armored plates, venomous spines, thermal vision, and territorial aggression that made most species' fight or flight response simply choose flight. Kira stood her ground on her high point, making herself visible. The creature roared, a sound that vibrated the observation deck's windows. Several cadets flinched. Kira didn't move. She stood tall, arms slightly spread, making eye contact with the massive predator. "She's going to be killed," Zarkesh said, reaching for the emergency extraction protocol. Wait, Vexthera commanded, staying his hand. Watch. The creature approached, each step making the ground shake. It roared again, closer now, its breath condensing in the humid air. Kira remained motionless, her expression calm, almost bored. The standoff lasted 30 seconds that felt like hours. Then, impossibly, the creature broke eye contact. It snorted, marking a tree with its scent glands, and turned away, crashing back into the jungle. The observation deck erupted in confused chatter. Explain, Vexthera demanded of Chen. The human professor shrugged. Dominance display. Most territorial predators are risk-averse at their core. They want food and safety, not fights. Kira showed she wasn't afraid, wasn't prey, and wasn't worth the energy to attack. The creature reassessed its cost-benefit analysis and decided to hunt easier targets. That would require understanding predator psychology across species, Rindal protested. Yes, Chen agreed. Humans are persistently good at understanding predators. We had to be. We spent most of our evolutionary history as prey animals who got smart enough to turn the tables. We understand hunters because we were hunted. We understand danger because we grew up surrounded by it. In the simulation, Kira had resumed her journey. She moved with purpose now, heading toward what the simulation had designated as the extraction zone. A location deliberately placed beyond multiple hazards to ensure no cadet could actually reach it. She was already halfway there and she was still humming. Vexthera pulled up Earth's planetary data file, reading details she'd previously dismissed as database corruption or exaggeration. Predator-to-prey ratios. Natural disaster frequency. Atmospheric oxygen content. Gravity. Pathogen diversity. The numbers painted a picture of a planet that shouldn't have evolved sapient life. It should have been a graveyard. Instead, it had produced humanity. Commandant, Thalvan rumbled. Perhaps we should reconsider the Academy's curriculum. If this is what humans consider normal. Yes, Vexthera said quietly, watching Kira navigate a toxic swamp with casual expertise. I think we should. Adaptation. By the third day, the simulation had abandoned all pretense of standard difficulty curves. The Academy's AI, designed to challenge cadets appropriately, had begun treating Kira's scenario as a personal puzzle to solve. Current Environmental Hostility Index, 8.7, reported the AI. This exceeds recommended training parameters by 400%. And the cadet stress indicators? Vexthera asked, though she already knew the answer. Heart rate, 72 beats per minute. Cortisol levels, baseline. Brain activity suggests she is experiencing enjoyment. The observation deck had become a permanent fixture of activity. Classes had been unofficially suspended as instructors and cadets alike found excuses to witness the humans' progress. Even Admiral Korvax, the Academy's director, had arrived to observe. The three-star admiral was a Telnarian, his species known for military excellence and strategic thinking. He stood beside Vexthera, his sensor array focused on the simulation below. Explain what I'm seeing, Commandant. Honestly, Admiral? We're not entirely sure anymore. In the simulation, Kira had encountered the acid rain event, a scenario designed to test emergency shelter protocols and resource management. The rain itself could dissolve most organic materials within minutes. Standard procedure was to use provided emergency equipment to construct a protective barrier. Kira had no such equipment. She'd entered with nothing but her academy uniform. Instead, she'd observed the local wildlife. Small burrowing creatures had retreated into mounds with a specific clay composition. She'd excavated similar clay, mixed it with plant fibers, and created a shelter with a sloped roof that channeled the rain away. She'd even improved the design by adding a collection system for the neutralized water. That's the Javish beetle adaptation method, Professor Rindal said, his voice barely audible. It's a survival technique documented on exactly one planet in the outer sectors. There's no possible way she could know about it unless the same environmental pressures that created it on that planet also existed on Earth, Chen finished. Convergent evolution. If a survival technique works, nature tends to discover it independently across multiple worlds. And humans, Admiral Korvax said slowly, have apparently experienced every environmental pressure in the known galaxy. A new cadet had joined the observation. Zephyr, a lysanth whose species evolved on a paradise world with minimal predators and optimal conditions. She'd befriended Kira during basic training and now watched with a mixture of awe and horror. I don't understand, Zephyr said, her bioluminescent skin pulsing with confusion. When we trained together in combat scenarios, Kira was good but not exceptional. She struggled with zero-gravity maneuvering. She's not superhuman. Chin smiled. No, she's very human. That's the point. This simulation isn't testing combat skills or technical knowledge. It's testing survival instincts, and that's where humans excel. We're not the strongest or fastest or smartest species in any single category. But we're good enough at everything to survive almost anywhere. On screen, Kira had emerged from her shelter as the acid rain subsided. She'd spotted something in the distance, a structure that shouldn't have been there. The simulation's AI had introduced an abandoned research station, a deliberate temptation designed to lure cadets into trap scenarios. Most cadets would either avoid it entirely or rush toward it hoping for supplies. Kira approached cautiously, using vegetation for cover, watching for signs of habitation or danger. When she reached the perimeter, she didn't enter immediately. Instead, she circled the entire structure, noting entry points, checking for tracks, testing the air for scents. Only after a complete reconnaissance did she enter, and even then she kept her back to walls and maintained awareness of exit routes. Military training? Asked Zarkesh. Chin shook his head. Basic human caution. We teach children not to enter unfamiliar spaces without checking them first. It's instinctive after enough generations dealing with ambush predators. Inside the station, the simulation had placed a medical kit, food rations, and a damaged communication device. It had also placed a venomous arthropod nest in the ceiling and a structural weakness that would collapse the building if cadets stayed too long. Kira spotted the nest immediately. She grabbed the medical kit and rations but left the communication device. She'd apparently noticed the structural issue as well. She was out of the building in under 90 seconds, just before the AI triggered the collapse. She's treating our simulation like an enemy, Vexthara observed. She trusts nothing. Would you? Chin asked. If you'd grown up on a planet where the flowers are poisonous, the cute animals carry diseases, the weather can kill you, and even the water has microorganisms that want you dead? Humans learn very early that the universe doesn't care about them. We survive by being suspicious of everything until proven safe, not the other way around. Admiral Korvax turned to face the assembled group. I'm beginning to understand why the Coalition had such difficulty during first contact with humanity. We assumed they would be like other species from harsh worlds. Specialized, adapted to their specific environment, helpless elsewhere. But Earth isn't just harsh. It's comprehensively hostile in ways that forced humans to develop universal survival adaptations. They're generalists by necessity, Rindal agreed. And very, very good ones. In the simulation, night was falling again. The AI prepared its next challenge, a pack of nocturnal hunters with sound-based tracking abilities. They were designed to be nearly impossible to evade. Kira found a hollow tree, covered herself in mud to mask her scent, and remained perfectly still. The hunters passed within meters, their echolocation pinging off the tree but not registering the motionless human inside. After they passed, she cleaned off the mud using leaves, found a safer location, and actually got a full night's sleep. Zephyr's luminescence had faded to a dim glow. Is this what it's like for all humans? Living in constant danger? Chin considered the question carefully. Not anymore for most of us. We've built cities, technology, civilization. But the instincts remain. Every human carries millions of years of survival experience in their genes and thousands of years of accumulated knowledge in their culture. We can turn it off when we're safe, but we never forget how to turn it back on. Terrifying, Zephyr whispered. Yes, Chin agreed with a slight smile. We are. The storm. Dawn of the fourth day brought an ominous change to the simulation. Dark clouds gathered with unnatural speed, and the atmospheric pressure dropped precipitously. The Academy's AI had decided to deploy its ultimate environmental challenge. Hurricane force winds, Category 5 equivalent, announced the monitoring system. Combined with electrical storm activity and flash flooding. Survival probability for current sector, 0.003%. Admiral Korvax's sensory array pivoted sharply. That's not a training scenario. That's an execution. The human hasn't requested extraction, Vexthara said, though her mandibles clicked with anxiety. And the simulation is technically within ultimate parameters. Technically within parameters? The Admiral's voice carried an edge. Commandant, we're about to watch a cadet die in a simulation because the AI has decided it needs to win. In the simulation, Kira stood on a rocky outcropping watching the approaching storm. The wind had already picked up, strong enough to bend trees and send smaller vegetation tumbling across the landscape. Lightning arced between clouds, illuminating the apocalyptic scene. She didn't look afraid. She looked focused. The observation deck had gone silent. Even the cadets who'd been cheering her on now watched with morbid fascination and growing horror. This was beyond any reasonable test. Kira began moving immediately but not away from the storm. She ran parallel to its projected path, heading toward a geological feature she'd noted earlier, a cliff face with visible cave systems. The run was brutal, fighting against winds that were trying to throw her off her feet, dodging debris that could easily kill her. "She'll never make it," Cadet Plex said. "The caves are too far." But Kira had already proved herself capable of the impossible. She used the terrain to her advantage, staying in wind shadows where possible, timing her movements between gusts. When a massive branch came tumbling toward her, she didn't freeze, she dove forward, letting it pass overhead by centimeters. She reached the cliff face as the first rain began to fall. But these weren't normal drops. The simulation had created rain so heavy it felt like being beaten with clubs. Each drop hit with enough force to bruise. Kira pressed herself against the rock, feeling for handholds. The caves were 20 meters up, a climb that would be challenging in perfect conditions. In this storm it was nearly suicidal. She began climbing anyway. "Stop this," Zephyr pleaded, her luminescence flickering with distress. "Please, someone stop the simulation." I can't," Vexthra admitted. "She'd have to request extraction herself, and she's not saying anything." Instructor Thalvan watched with a mixture of respect and concern. His species understood physical challenges, lived for them. But even he had limits. That climb would challenge a Bronther in full climbing gear. She's doing it with bare hands in a hurricane. Kira's progress was agonizingly slow. Each movement had to be carefully calculated, each handhold tested before committing her weight. The wind tried to peel her off the cliff face. The rain made the rock slick. Lightning struck nearby, the thunder so loud it should have been disorienting. She kept climbing. Professor Chin found himself holding his breath, a very human response. "Come on, Kira. You've got this." Halfway up, Kira's left hand slipped. For a heart-stopping moment, she hung by 3 points of contact, the wind howling around her, certain death waiting below. Cadets gasped. Instructors leaned forward. Kira swung her body, using the momentum to reach a new handhold and continued climbing. By the void, Admiral Korvax breathed. "Is this normal for humans?" "No," Shin said honestly. "This is exceptional even for us. But the potential? Yes, that's human. We're the species that climbed mountains because they were there. That crossed oceans on wooden boats. That walked across continents with nothing but our feet and our stubbornness." Kira reached the cave entrance just as the storm reached full intensity. She pulled herself into the opening and collapsed, breathing hard, her uniform torn and her hands bleeding from the climb. The observation deck erupted in spontaneous applause from multiple species, a cacophony of sounds ranging from Aquarian whistles to Bronther bellows. But Kira wasn't done. After catching her breath for only a few minutes, she stood and began exploring the cave system. The simulation had populated it with dangers, of course. Unstable footing, toxic gases in deeper chambers, and a species of aggressive cave-dwelling predators. She navigated it all with methodical care. She tested the air before proceeding into new chambers. She listened for sounds of wildlife. She marked her path to avoid getting lost. When she encountered the cave predators, blind creatures that hunted by vibration, she moved with such careful slowness that they passed her by, unable to distinguish her from the natural settling of stone. In a deeper chamber she found water, a clean underground stream. She drank carefully, knowing even fresh water could carry dangers, but also knowing she needed hydration. She found cave fungi that her knowledge identified as edible, supplementing her dwindling supplies. As the storm raged outside, Kira created a comfortable camp in the cave. She even found dry materials and started a small fire, the smoke venting through cracks in the cave system. "She's done it," Rindal said, wonder in his voice. "She's actually survived the worst environmental challenge in our database." "Survived?" Vexthara corrected, pointing at the screen where Kira sat by her fire, using a sharp stone to fashion a crude but effective fishing spear. "She's thriving." Admiral Korvax made a decision. "Commandant, I want a full report on human capabilities for the Coalition Defense Council. If one human cadet can do this, I need to understand what a trained human military force would be capable of." "Admiral," Shin interjected carefully. "With respect, Kira represents trained human capabilities, not exceptional ones. She's a good cadet, but she's not enhanced, not genetically special, not a super soldier. She's just human. The Admiral's silence spoke volumes. Outside the caves, the simulation storm reached its peak. Winds over 400 kilometers per hour, lightning strikes every few seconds, flooding that turned the jungle into a raging sea. Inside her cave, Kira fell asleep by her fire, genuinely comfortable for the first time since the simulation began. She was smiling. Revelation. Day 5 began with an emergency meeting in Admiral Korvax's office. The simulation had been running for twice its intended duration, and the human cadet showed no signs of requesting extraction or even slowing down. She's reached the theoretical extraction point, Vexthera reported, her chitinous plates shifting with an emotion her species rarely displayed: embarrassment. The location we designated as unreachable. She arrived 3 hours ago. And, the Admiral prompted. She looked at the extraction beacon, examined the surrounding area for about 10 minutes and then kept going. She's exploring the simulation's edge territories now, areas we barely programmed because we never expected anyone to get that far. Admiral Korvax's sensor array dimmed, the Telnarian equivalent of closing one's eyes in frustration. So our Deathworld simulation has become a nature hike. Not exactly, sir, Chin interjected. He'd been summoned to the meeting along with several other human instructors. I've been reviewing her path through the simulation. She's not just surviving, she's mapping. Every plant she encounters, every predator, every geological feature. She's conducting a complete survival analysis of the environment. For what purpose? Training, probably. Humans have a saying, proper preparation prevents poor performance. Kira's treating this simulation like a real deployment to an unknown world. She's gathering intelligence that could save lives if anyone ever actually needed to operate in an environment like this. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Okonkwo, the Academy's human combat instructor, nodded in agreement. It's consistent with human military doctrine. We don't just want to survive, we want to understand, adapt, and eventually dominate the environment. Give a human enough time in any habitat, and they'll figure out how to not just live there but thrive there. Admiral Korvax activated a holographic display showing Earth's surface. I've been researching your homeworld. The variety of environments is unsettling. Frozen wastelands, burning deserts, dense jungles, toxic swamps, volcanic regions, high-altitude mountains, deep oceans. And humans live in all of them. We do, Okonkwo confirmed. We're not the only species with environmental diversity on our homeworld, but we might be the only species that actively chose to colonize every possible habitat instead of staying in our evolutionary comfort zone. Why would you do that? Vexthera asked. It seems inefficient. Dangerous. Chin smiled. Because it was there. Because we were curious. Because we wanted to prove we could. Humans are driven by a combination of curiosity, stubbornness, and a fundamental refusal to let the universe tell us where we can and cannot go. In the simulation below, Kira had discovered something interesting. A region where the programmed ecosystem transitioned from jungle to desert. The simulation's designers had intended it as a hard boundary, an impassable barrier of extreme heat and lack of water. Kira studied it like a puzzle to be solved. She spent 2 hours observing the transition zone, noting how the vegetation changed, where morning dew collected, which creatures moved between the ecosystems and how. Then she began gathering supplies. Plant material that could retain water, large leaves for sun protection, and strips of bark she could weave into a basic carrier. She's going to cross it, Cadet Plex observed from the observation deck, which had become a permanent gathering place. She's actually going to try crossing the desert. There's nothing on the other side, Zephyr pointed out. It's just the edge of the simulation. Empty space. But Kira didn't know that, and she'd apparently decided that if there was an environment, it needed exploring. The desert crossing took an entire day. Kira traveled during early morning and late evening, avoiding the peak heat. She rested during midday in shelter she constructed from available materials. She rationed her water with military precision. When she found a rock formation that might hold moisture, she dug carefully and was rewarded with a small seep. Unbelievable, Rindal muttered. That seep wasn't even programmed. The simulation's geological subroutines generated it as part of natural processes, but it was never meant to be findable. She's thinking like the environment, Thalvan observed. Not imposing her will on it, but understanding its logic and working within it. Admiral Korvax had been silent for some time, processing what he was witnessing. Finally he spoke. I'm beginning to understand why the human delegation to the coalition was so insistent on certain treaty provisions. Chen looked up sharply. Sir? The clauses about human colonies, about sovereignty over worlds deemed uninhabitable by coalition standards. We thought they were bargaining for marginal territories, unwanted space. But they weren't, were they? No, sir, Chen said quietly. We were securing the right to settle worlds that would be death traps for most species but are perfectly manageable for us. Worlds rich in resources that others can't access without enormous infrastructure investment. We saw opportunity where others saw only danger. That's not just practical, Vexthera said slowly. It's strategic. You're positioning humanity to control territory across environmental spectrums that would require other species to cooperate with you to access. Okonkwo shrugged. We're not trying to be devious. We're just doing what humans do, settling wherever we can survive. If that happens to give us strategic advantages, well, our ancestors didn't evolve on a death world just to waste the adaptations it gave us. In the simulation, Kira had reached the far side of the desert. She'd found a small oasis, another accidentally generated feature, and was bathing, washing days of accumulated grime from her skin and uniform. She looked tired but satisfied. The simulation's AI, perhaps conceding defeat, generated a message on her heads-up display. Extraction available. Simulation objectives exceeded. Performance rating, exceptional. Kira read the message, considered it for a moment, and then dismissed it. She had noticed something else in the distance. Mountains. Admiral Korvax watched her begin the trek toward them and made a decision. Commandant Vexthera, I want human environmental training integrated into the core academy curriculum for all cadets. Sir? If a single human can do this, imagine what a mixed-species team could accomplish with proper training. We've been teaching cadets to avoid danger. Humans teach each other to understand and overcome it. That's the mindset we need for deep space exploration, for colony establishment on frontier worlds, for survival when everything goes wrong. He turned to Chen and Okonkwo. Your people didn't just survive a death world. You mastered it. And now you're going to teach the rest of us how. The mountains. By day 6, the simulation had taken on a life of its own. The Academy's AI, designed to adapt and challenge, had essentially given up trying to kill Kira and instead began to simply observe her. It generated terrain and challenges with an almost curious quality, as if wondering what this strange human would do next. Kira stood at the base of the mountain range, looking up at peaks that scraped the simulated sky. The air here was thinner, colder. Snow capped the higher elevations. For most species, this would be an insurmountable barrier without technical climbing equipment. In the observation deck, a new audience had gathered. The senior class cadets who would be graduating in weeks and deploying to their first assignments across the galaxy. They'd been instructed to watch and learn. Notice her breathing, Okonkwo pointed out. She's already adapting to the altitude change. Taking deeper breaths, pacing herself. Humans are remarkably good at altitude adjustment. Our homeworld has populations living comfortably at elevations that would incapacitate most species. Kira began her ascent using a winding path rather than trying to climb straight up. She was learning the mountain, understanding its moods. She found game trails, followed the logic of erosion patterns, avoided areas where snow accumulation suggested avalanche risk. She's treating the mountain with respect, Thalvan rumbled approvingly. Many young warriors think strength means confrontation. Wisdom means knowing when to work with your environment instead of against it. The temperature dropped as Kira climbed higher. Her academy uniform was designed for climate control, but the simulation was pushing its limits. She stopped to gather moss and lichen, stuffing them into her uniform for additional insulation, a primitive but effective solution. Cadet Vorn, a Sekiri whose species evolved in underground thermal vents, raised a relevant question. Why is she continuing? She's exceeded every objective. She's proven whatever point needed proving. Why risk the mountain? Chen smiled. Because it's there. I know that sounds flip, but it's genuinely part of human psychology. We climb mountains, cross oceans, explore caves, not because they're useful or necessary but because they represent a challenge. The question "can I?" is often enough motivation for a human to try. Zephyr's bioluminescence pulsed thoughtfully. That seems inefficient. Even dangerous. It is, Okonkwo agreed. Humans die in stupid ways all the time because we just had to try something. But it's also how we push boundaries, discover new capabilities, and occasionally stumble onto something remarkable. Our greatest achievements and our dumbest mistakes often come from the same impulse. At a rocky ledge halfway up the mountain, Kira made camp as the simulated sun set. The view was breathtaking: jungle far below, desert in the distance, storm clouds clearing on the horizon. She sat and simply watched for a while, eating from her supplies, seemingly content. "She's enjoying this," Vexthera observed. "After 6 days of constant survival challenges, she's actually enjoying the view." "Humans appreciate beauty," Chin said. "It's one of our defining traits. We create art, music, literature. We preserve natural wonders. We'll climb a deadly mountain partially for the challenge, but also because something in us responds to the majesty of it. We're practical survivors and impractical dreamers at the same time." The night brought predictable challenges: temperature drops, nocturnal predators, and reduced visibility. Kira handled them with her usual competence. She built a fire in a sheltered crevice, set up basic alarms using stones that would rattle if disturbed, and actually got another good night's sleep. Morning of what would be the 7th day began with Kira continuing her ascent. The air was now thin enough that her breathing was labored, and the cold was intense enough that she had to keep moving to maintain body temperature. She reached a section where the path ended, a sheer rock face leading to the summit. Most climbers would turn back. Kira studied it for several minutes, testing handholds, planning her route. Then she began to climb. "This is actual free climbing," Zarkesh noted, his crystalline structure resonating with concern. "No equipment, no safety measures. A fall from that height would be fatal even in simulation." "Should we intervene?" asked a junior instructor. Admiral Korvax, who'd returned to observe the final stages, shook his head. "No. She's earned the right to make her own choices. If she believes she can do this, I'm inclined to trust her judgment." The climb was harrowing to watch. Each movement was deliberate, calculated. Kira's breathing was steady despite the exertion and thin air. Several times she had to pause, hanging by fingertips and toes, to figure out the next move. "Humans used to do this for sport," Chin mentioned quietly. "Still do, actually. We call it free soloing. It's considered extremely dangerous, but people do it anyway. The ultimate expression of human climbing ability: just you, the rock, and your skills." Kira pulled herself over the final edge and stood on the summit. The highest point in the simulated world, a place the designers never expected anyone to reach. She stood there, arms spread, face turned to the sun, and let out a whoop of pure joy that echoed down the mountain. The observation deck, despite housing dozens of different species with different cultures and values, erupted in applause. Even the most skeptical instructors couldn't help but be moved by the sheer audacity and skill they'd witnessed. Vexthera pulled up the simulation controls. I think it's time to end this. She's proven everything that could possibly be proven." "Agreed," Admiral Korvax said. "Prepare extraction. And Commandant? Make sure we have a flag or marker or something she can plant up there. Humans like that sort of thing, symbolic gestures for their achievements." "Already done, sir. The simulation's generating one now." On the mountain peak, a pole with the Academy's emblem materialized near Kira. She looked at it, then at the observation cameras she knew were watching, and smiled that same smile from the first day. Then she planted the flag at the summit of a mountain that didn't exist, on a world that was never real, and claimed it anyway, because that's what humans do. Aftermath. The simulation chamber powered down gradually, reality reasserting itself as the pocket dimension collapsed. Jungle, desert, mountains, and storms dissolved into neutral gray walls and standard lighting. Kira Valen stood in the center of the empty chamber, still in her torn and dirty uniform, still smiling. The chamber doors opened, and she was met by what appeared to be the entire Academy staff and student body. The silence was profound, dozens of species, hundreds of individuals, all staring at the human who just redefined what they thought possible. Admiral Korvax stepped forward, his Telnarian posture rigid with formal respect. "Cadet Valen. That was the most extraordinary performance in the 327-year history of this academy." Kira's smile faded slightly, replaced by genuine surprise. "Sir, I was just doing my best." "Your best," Vexthera said, mandibles clicking with amusement, "exceeded our worst by a considerable margin. We designed that simulation to be impossible. You made it look recreational." "With respect, Commandant, it was recreational. I haven't had that much fun since." Kira paused, seeming to realize how her words might sound. "I mean, it was challenging, but I grew up camping and hiking with my family. My parents are ecological survey specialists. We've been to dozens of frontier worlds. This was like a greatest hits compilation of environments I already knew." The assembled crowd processed this information. Professor Rindal tentatively asked, So this is normal for you? Individually? Sure. All together in 6 days with no equipment? That was admittedly intense. But humans have been surviving in hostile environments for our entire existence. It's kind of our thing. Cadet Plex stepped forward, his Dorvanian features arranged in an expression that might have been admiration. You climbed that mountain with your bare hands. Why? Kira shrugged. Because I could? Because it was beautiful? Because I wanted to see the view from the top. She paused, thinking. Honestly, I'm not sure I can explain it in a way that makes sense. It's just human. Zephyr pushed through the crowd, her bioluminescence bright with emotion, and pulled Kira into a hug that crossed species boundaries. You were amazing. And terrifying. But mostly amazing. Thanks, Zeph, Kira laughed, returning the hug. Though I have to admit, I'm really looking forward to a hot shower and real food that I didn't have to forage or hunt. Admiral Korvax cleared his throat, drawing attention back. Cadet Valen, your performance has prompted some significant changes to Academy policy and curriculum. Effective immediately, we'll be developing new training protocols based on human survival methodologies. We'd like you to assist in creating these programs. Me, sir? I'm just a first-year cadet. You're a human, Okonkwo interjected, stepping forward. And you've just demonstrated capabilities that the rest of the galaxy needs to understand. Not to copy, most species couldn't survive what you just did, but to learn from. Different environmental approaches, different risk assessment frameworks, different ways of thinking about challenges. Chin nodded agreement. You've shown that humans bring unique value to coalition operations. Not because we're better than other species, but because we're different in useful ways. The Admiral wants to leverage that difference to make all of us more effective. Kira looked overwhelmed but nodded. Of course, sir. I'd be honored to help. Excellent, Admiral Korvax said. But first, medical evaluation, rest, and a proper meal. You've been in that simulation for 6 days. Your body needs recovery time. As medical staff moved forward to escort Kira for evaluation, Cadet Vorn called out, Wait. I have to know, what was the hardest part? What almost made you request extraction? Kira thought about it seriously. Honestly? The boredom during the storm. I was safe in the cave, everything was managed and I just had to wait it out. That was probably the most challenging mentally, just sitting there with nothing to do. The observation deck erupted in stunned laughter. Of course the human had found safety boring. As Kira was escorted out, the crowd began to disperse, breaking into animated discussions in dozens of languages. The human cadet had given them all something to think about. Admiral Korvax remained with his senior staff. Commandant Vexthera, I want a full analysis of what we learned from this exercise. Professor Chin, begin developing the new curriculum frameworks. Lieutenant Commander Okonkwo, I want training scenarios that challenge our cadets while incorporating human survival philosophy. And the simulation itself, sir? Vexthera asked. Korvax considered. Preserve it exactly as it ran for Cadet Valen. Make it available for other cadets, but with proper difficulty scaling. And add a new designation to our training categories. What designation, Admiral? Human Standard. Let's see how many other species can reach it. Weeks later, Kira sat in the Academy cafeteria with Zephyr, Plex, and a handful of other cadets from various species. They were watching news feeds showing the Coalition's response to the human Deathworld revelation, as the media had dubbed it. They're making a bigger deal of this than necessary, Kira said, embarrassed by the attention. Are they though? Plex asked. You changed how the entire galaxy thinks about environmental challenges. You showed us that what we consider impossible might just be difficult. That's significant. Zephyr's luminescence pulsed warmly. You also showed us that different species bring different strengths. Humans aren't better than us, you're just better at certain things. And that's okay. That's what the Coalition is supposed to be about, combining our different strengths. Kira smiled, raising her drink in a toast. To different strengths, then. To different strengths, the others echoed, raising their various drinking vessels. Across the table, Cadet Vorn leaned forward conspiratorially. So, Kira, there's a zero-gravity survival simulation next month. Want to show us how humans handle that? Kira's smile turned mischievous. Zero-G? Now that might actually be challenging. I'm in. Her friends groaned, but they were smiling too. They'd learned an important lesson from watching Kira in the Deathworld simulation. The universe was full of challenges, but it was also full of opportunities. All you had to do was approach them with the right mindset. And maybe, just maybe, smile when things got difficult. After all, that's what humans did.